I'm Steve Wiggins, and this is the Groundworks Ministries podcast. Today we're reading from the book of 1 Kings, chapter 8, and let's focus on verses 57 and 58. May the Lord our God be with us as He was with our ancestors, and may He never leave us or abandon us. In this way, He will incline our hearts toward Him so that we live according to His ways and observe His commands, laws, and rulings which He ordered our fathers to obey. British politician John Bright once wrote that when sallying forth, riding out on a horse, when sallying forth in the morning, he did not have to choose between wearing trousers or a shirt. Decency, he continued, has joined trousers and shirts. Speaking of the sanctity of the marriage union, in Matthew chapter 19, verse 6, Jesus says this, "What therefore God has joined together, let no man put asunder." But this principle of joining together also applies to the study and the practice of theology, especially to the teaching about God's character and His ways. Christians tend to stress one aspect of God's character at the expense of another, and in doing so, they risk sallying forth half-clothed. Whenever people refuse to accept the whole counsel of God, both New and Old Testaments, well then by default they end up creating their own doctrinal graven images. Solomon's prayer is instructive from a theological perspective because it shows us how we must hold the truths about God in a holy tension. What do I mean? Well, as trousers and shirts cannot be separated, and the writer remain decently attired as a gentleman, well, so we must keep together what God has joined in the Bible, so that we know Him as He has chosen to reveal Himself to us. And then we live accordingly. Here are some of the seemingly contradicting and yet completely complementing attributes of God revealed in Solomon's prayer. You have clarity and mystery at the same time. What does that mean? How can you be clear and mysterious? God shrouds Himself in a thick cloud, and yet He reveals Himself through His Word. He satisfies our need for both clarity and certainty, and yet His infinite wisdom and His plans cannot be fully comprehended by His creatures. So He remains mysterious to us. He also puts together faithfulness and expectation. Because God has faithfully delivered and provided for us in the past, then we don't have to fear for the future. Even though the future is mostly unrevealed to us, the certainty that God will bring about His Word is completely revealed to us. He is immense, and yet at the same time, He is intimate. Solomon acknowledges that God is in heaven, and not even heaven can contain Him, much less the temple. And yet God exhorts Israel to pray not toward heaven, but toward the temple, which houses His presence. God is both uncontainable and He is personally available. Then you have severity and mercy. You have the lordship and the justice of God, but then you also have the grace and mercy. God's people are always getting into sin situations, wherein we make ourselves targets of God's rebuke. And yet, God provides a pathway to restoration and forgiveness. He is both just, as the Bible says, and the justifier. And then we have practicality in universality. When you say, oh my goodness, what does that mean? Well, God sets Israel apart from the nations, and yet He does not discriminate against anyone, whether Jew or Gentile, who seeks to worship Him. You also have what they call eschatology and practicality. Now, eschatology is a big word. I had to have it explained to me when I was a young believer. It means the study of end times, right? The things which will happen far in the future, or perhaps not so far as we think. God is Lord over the last day, but He's also the Lord over every day. And of course, for us, the great divine contradictory and yet complementary combination is that when God joined His Son Jesus with His bride, the church, you have He who knew no sin, and yet He became the sin offering for those of us who sin on a constant basis. And yet he has joined his sinless Son to his bride. Now that is complementary, and it's also somewhat contradictory. And yet it is true. He loves you so much that he would give his life for you. And he's risen from the grave, proving that he has defeated sin and he has defeated death. And he offers to us that bridal proposal. He offers to us an opportunity to turn from our sin, surrender to him, and be saved. I hope you'll do that today, if you haven't already, and I hope you'll share it with somebody else so that they could know him in a saving way as well. I'm Steve Wiggins, and this is the Groundworks Ministries podcast. Groundworks Ministries operates entirely through financial donations from faithful people like you. And if you're being ministered to through the daily teaching of Groundworks Ministries and you'd like to help us foster revival by leading God's people back to the Bible, would you consider donating to Groundworks Ministries today? Because we need your support now more than ever. There are so many things that we could be doing, and yet we can't do them until we have the resources to do so. Don't you want revival in your city? Well, help us get people to that place. Donating is secure and it is easy at our website. So check us out at groundworksministries.com.